My own brother looked our father dead in the eye, 3 weeks after I caught him, and said I'd misread a hug. He said it with his wife sitting 2 feet away from him. He said it with my wife sitting 2 feet away from me. 6 days later, both of those marriages were over. I was the reason, and I have never once regretted it. None of that makes sense yet. I know that. So let me back up. Because you can't understand why a grown man calmly detonates his entire family at a dinner table unless you understand what an ordinary Thursday looked like in my life, right up until the moment it stopped being ordinary. My name is Ryan Coleman. I'm 35. I work as a project coordinator for a construction and engineering firm in Eugene, Oregon. Up until last September, I would have told you my life was boring, in the best possible way. Steady job, a house up on the West Hills with a view of the river, a wife, Megan, 33, a dental hygienist, no kids yet. We were talking about it, actually. That detail matters more than you'd think. I have one sibling, my brother, Derek, 40 years old, 5 years older than me. For most of my life, he was the person I measured myself against and never quite caught up to. Derek married first. His wife, Claire. 2 kids, Mia, 9 that fall, and Jack, 6. Derek managed the parts department for a regional equipment dealer. Good money. Coached Jack's flag football team on Saturdays. Hosted Thanksgiving most years. On paper, he was the reliable one. The example. Growing up, Derek taught me how to throw a spiral, how to talk my way out of trouble with our mother, how to change the oil in my first car. When I met Megan at a mutual friend's graduation party, Derek was the first person in the family I introduced her to. A summer barbecue in my parents' backyard, near Hawthorne Park. I remember that afternoon clearly, even now. Charcoal smoke. My father at the grill in an apron my mother bought him as a joke. Derek handing Megan a lemonade and saying, with a grin I read as, harmless. So you're the one who finally got my brother to settle down. I might have to fight him for you. Everyone laughed. Megan laughed too, a beat late, glancing at me before she did. I laughed the loudest. Because that's what you do when your older brother makes a joke like that in front of your girlfriend. You laugh, you move on. You never once imagine it wasn't a joke. I didn't know it yet. The version of my brother I'd built in my head had been fake for a long time, longer than I could have guessed. Sitting in my truck on that Thursday, I want to be fair to the version of my life before all this, because it really was good. Megan and I had our routines. Tacos on Tuesdays, because it was easy and neither of us had to think about it after a long day. Sunday dinners at my parents'. A running joke about the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom that neither of us ever got around to fixing. We talked about kids seriously that summer, even picked out a name we liked, for a girl. I'm not going to tell you what it was. Some things you just keep. That's the life I thought I was walking back into. That Thursday afternoon, with a bag of ginger ale and crackers in my hand, here's the thing about that day. It started completely normal. Megan texted me around 9 that morning. Her stomach was off. She'd called in sick. She was going to rest. I offered to swing by at lunch, bring her ginger ale, some crackers. She told me not to bother. Don't bother. I think about those 2 words more than almost anything else from that day, because they were the first real lie. Even if I didn't clock them as one at the time, I went anyway. Not because I suspected anything. I want to be honest about that. I went because that's just who I was in that marriage. I liked taking care of her. I liked being the guy who showed up with crackers. I clocked out a little after noon, told my supervisor I'd be back within the hour. 15-minute drive home. Our house sits on a quiet street off Cedar Ridge, close enough to Hawthorne Park that you can hear kids on the playground on a nice day, unseasonably warm for late September. The leaves hadn't turned yet, even though the calendar said they should have. I called Megan once on the way over, straight to voicemail. Didn't think anything of it, figured she was asleep, phone on silent. Exactly what you'd want a sick person doing at noon on a weekday. I stopped at the market on Kessler Avenue. Ginger ale, a sleeve of crackers, and, on impulse, The orange popsicles she liked as a kid. The ones her mother gave her when she had a stomach bug. Small, dumb, caring gestures. The kind you don't think twice about. Until later, when you're forced to replay every single one of them and ask yourself what you were actually walking into. I noticed Derek's truck before I noticed anything else. Parked half a block down, not in front of the house. Parked the way you park when you don't want a vehicle to be the first thing someone sees. I didn't think affair. My brain didn't even go there. I thought maybe he was dropping something off. Maybe he'd stopped to check on Megan the same way I had, because that's the kind of built-in trust you have for family, before you have a reason not to. I let myself in quietly, out of habit more than anything, didn't want to wake her if she was actually resting. The house was still. Too still. I felt it in my chest before my brain caught up to it. Something is wrong here. That was the first real thought I had. Standing in my own hallway, grocery bag in my hand. I heard a sound from upstairs. I'm not going to describe it. You don't need that. And I don't need to relive it out loud. I stood at the bottom of those stairs for maybe 3 full seconds. Felt the bag slip out of my fingers, cans rolling across the hardwood. Sit with that image for a second, because I've had to sit with it a lot longer than 3 seconds. My wife, my brother, in the bed we'd bought together 2 Christmases before. No misunderstanding to explain away, no innocent version of events. My brother's face. When he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, that's something I will remember until the day I die. It wasn't shock. It was something closer to relief. Like some exhausting secret had finally been allowed to end. Megan kept saying my name, over and over, like repeating it enough times could rewind the last 90 seconds. Derek didn't say anything at first, just sat there, staring at the carpet, like it owed him an explanation. I didn't scream. I want to be honest about that too, because people expect this part to be an explosion. It wasn't. I felt strangely, terrifyingly calm. I picked my keys back up off the floor. One sentence came out flat and even. Get dressed, both of you. We're going to talk, and then you're going to decide how the rest of this plays out. I didn't know it yet. That sentence was the beginning of a plan I hadn't consciously made. Some part of my brain had already skipped past the shouting match version of this story and landed on something colder, something that would eventually put every single person in my family at one table with nowhere left to hide. Megan came downstairs first, wrapped in a robe, mascara smeared under her eyes from crying she hadn't been doing an hour earlier. Derek came down a few minutes later, moving slow, the way you move when you're trying to buy time you don't have. Ryan, it's not. Don't, I said, sharper than I meant it. Don't finish that sentence. Here's what I found out. Standing in my own kitchen, refusing to sit down, because some part of me knew that sitting down would make this feel like a conversation instead of an ending. This wasn't new. It wasn't a one-time mistake, a lapse, the kind of language people reach for when they want forgiveness cheap, Megan told me. Through tears I genuinely couldn't tell were guilt or fear of getting caught. That it had been going on for 2 years. 2 years. Quiet. Careful. Built entirely on the fact that nobody would ever suspect Derek. Reliable Derek. Family man Derek. Doing this to his own brother. Then she told me something that changed the entire shape of the story in my head. Derek, she admitted, had been interested in her since before we were even married. Since that barbecue, 5 years earlier. The comments back then small, deniable, the kind you can wave off as a brother being a little too familiar. She'd brushed off at the time, because she loved me, because it didn't seem worth mentioning. 5 years. My brother had been circling my marriage since before it existed. I stood in that kitchen and felt something shift permanently in my understanding of my own family. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every time Derek clapped me on the back and called me a lucky man for landing Megan. All of it recontextualized itself in about 4 seconds. I didn't know it yet. The hardest part of that day wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing I was going to have to walk into my parents' house and detonate the version of our family that had existed my entire life. On purpose. With full knowledge of exactly what it would cost everyone in that room, including two kids who haven't done a single thing wrong. I looked at both of them and said the sentence that would set the next 3 weeks in motion. You're going to tell everyone. Mum, Dad, Claire, all of it, the truth. Not some cleaned-up version, this weekend, at Sunday dinner, in front of the whole family. If you don't, I will. And you will not like the version I tell. Derek's face went pale in a way I'd never seen on him. Ryan, think about the kids. Think about what this does to Mia and Jack. I laughed. Not a happy laugh, the kind that comes out when something is so unbelievable it physically has to leave your body somehow. You should have thought about your kids 2 years ago, every single time you got in that bed. I walked out of my own house that afternoon, got in my truck, drove back to work like nothing had happened, because I genuinely did not know what else to do with my body for the next 4 hours. I sat through a client meeting about drainage specifications for a warehouse project and have no memory of a single word said. My supervisor, Gary, a good-natured guy who'd known my father for years, caught me in the hallway afterward. You look like you've seen a ghost. Rough morning. You sure you're all right? I'll be fine. I nodded and waved him off, mostly because I didn't trust myself to explain any further without the whole thing spilling out in an office hallway. My hands didn't stop shaking until almost 6 that evening, sitting alone in my truck, long after everyone else had gone home. Before I left the house that afternoon, there's one more moment I haven't mentioned. Standing in the driveway, keys already in my hand. I almost called Claire. My thumb hovered over her name for a few seconds. Some instinct told me she deserved to know immediately, not in 3 days, not at a staged dinner, right then, while it was still raw enough that nobody could sand the edges off it. But another part of me, the part already thinking in terms of consequences instead of just pain, wanted every single person in that family to hear it at the same time, in the same room, with no chance for Derek and Megan to get their story straight beforehand. I put the phone back in my pocket. I've wondered since whether that was the right call, Claire told me. Much later. It wouldn't have mattered either way. By the time that Sunday came, she said, she'd already stopped being surprised by very much when it came to her marriage. I didn't know it yet. Somebody in that family already had her own plan quietly forming, one I wouldn't find out about until much later. The 3 days between that Thursday and Sunday dinner were some of the strangest of my life. I moved into the guest room that same night. Couldn't be in that bedroom 1 more hour, let alone sleep in it. Megan tried to talk to me twice. Friday evening, she knocked on the door, arms crossed over herself like she was cold. Can we please just talk? Not about Sunday. Just us. What actually happens to us? There isn't an us to talk about anymore. There's what you and Derek did, and there's what happens once everyone else knows about it. That's it. Saturday morning, over coffee I didn't ask for, she told me she never meant to fall in love with him. Fall in love. Like this had been some accident of the heart. Instead of 2 years of scheduled, deliberate choices, I set my mug down harder than I meant to. You don't fall into someone's bed for 2 years. You choose it every single time. Don't call it falling. She didn't have a response to that. Both times. I told her the same thing. Save whatever you need to say for Sunday, in front of everyone, or don't bother saving it at all. I called my father. Walter, 66, retired after 30 years running his own hardware supply business. Told him I needed the whole family together this weekend. Didn't tell him why, just that Derek and Megan both needed to be there. And Claire, too. My mother, Diane, 64, picked up on something in my voice immediately. Mothers always do. Is everything okay? It will be. Eventually. That was the most honest thing I could offer her. I want to tell you a little more about how this actually started, because the shape of it matters. 5 years ago, that barbecue, that joke. I might have to fight him for you. Sat there for 3 years while Megan and I dated, got engaged, got married. Then, 2 years ago. According to what Megan eventually admitted, it started small. Derek helped her move some furniture while I was away for a work training out of state. A conversation that went a little too long, a comment that should have ended it, and didn't. From there, it built slowly. In the spaces where I wasn't looking, my out-of-town trips, the Saturday mornings Derek told his own wife he was running errands. The first time anything physical happened, Megan told me, was at our own house. A weekend I was in Portland for a certification. She told herself it was a one-time lapse, something she'd carry quietly and never repeat. It didn't stay that way. Once something like that starts, I've come to understand the lie doesn't stay contained to one afternoon. It needs constant, ongoing maintenance. Fake plans, real alibis for imaginary errands, text messages deleted the moment they were read. 2 years of that. Running underneath every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary weeknight dinner where I sat across the table from my own brother with absolutely no idea what I was actually looking at. I asked her once why 2 years went by instead of 2 days. She didn't have a real answer. The closest thing she offered was that it felt easier to keep going than to face what stopping would mean. Probably the most honest sentence she managed that whole afternoon, even if it wasn't the answer I wanted. Claire had no idea. I want to be completely clear about that. Some people hearing a story like this assume everyone else must have suspected something. She didn't. She trusted her husband of 12 years the same way I trusted my wife of 4. That trust is exactly what Derek and Megan spent 2 years quietly exploiting. Sunday came. My parents' house sits on a quiet street near Hawthorne Park. The same house Derek and I grew up in. The same dining table we'd eaten Sunday dinners at our whole lives. My mother had made a roast and green beans, completely unaware of what she was actually hosting. Claire arrived with the kids. I'd insisted on one thing ahead of time, that Mia and Jack went straight into the back room to watch a movie once dinner was finished. Whatever was about to happen at that table. Those 2 kids did not need to witness it. We ate. It was, without question, the most unbearable meal of my life. I remember the specific sounds of it. Forks against my mother's good china, the set she only brought out for holidays and now, apparently, for this. The hum of the refrigerator in the next room, my father clearing his throat every so often, the way he does when a silence has gone on a beat too long for his comfort. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the roast was good, that some part of my brain was still capable of noticing that the green beans had just the right amount of garlic in them, even while the rest of me was counting down the minutes until I'd have to say the thing I'd come there to say. You'd think a moment like that would slow down. It didn't. It went by in pieces, disconnected, like a film reel with frames missing. My mother asked Megan if she was feeling better from whatever bug she'd had earlier in the week. Megan managed a quiet yes, staring at her plate. My father made small talk about a football score. Derek barely touched his food. Mia, 9 years old, chatted about a school project on state history. I forced myself to actually listen and respond, because she deserved at least one adult at that table giving her a normal conversation before everything around her changed. Jack 6 was more interested in his mashed potatoes than anything being said, which in hindsight felt like a small mercy. When my mother finally announced it was time for dessert, I caught her eye, gave the smallest shake of my head. She understood immediately. Offered the kids a movie in the back room first, so it doesn't get cold while we finish talking. Her voice admirably steady, given what she still didn't know was coming. Once the kids were settled, door mostly closed, I turned to my father. Dad, before everyone leaves tonight, there's something Derek and Megan need to tell you and Mom. The room went quiet in a way that felt physical, like the air pressure had changed. Derek tried the line first. He looked our father dead in the eye. Ryan's misreading a hug he saw. Dad, that's really all this is. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. A hug doesn't happen with both of you undressed in my bed in the middle of a Thursday afternoon. Tell them the truth, or I will, and you already know I have more detail than you'd like me sharing at this table. My mother made a sound I had never heard her make before. My father's face went through about 4 different expressions in 10 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, something that looked almost like physical pain settling into his jaw. And Claire, Claire just went completely still. Not crying, not yelling, still, in a way that scared me more than any amount of shouting would have. My father turned to Derek, voice shaking in a way I'd never heard from him before. "You're my son. He's your brother. How long did you think you could keep something like this hidden in a family this size?" Derek stared at the tablecloth. "It wasn't supposed to go on this long. It kept not ending." "That's not an answer," my father said, low and hard. "That's an excuse dressed up as one." My mother reached under the table and gripped my hand so hard it left a mark. She kept looking back and forth between Derek and Megan, waiting for one of them to say something that would make it make sense. Neither of them ever did, because there wasn't one. "How long?" Claire's voice was flat, controlled, aimed directly at Derek. Derek didn't answer. Megan did, finally telling the truth out loud. With the whole family in the room, 2 years. It started on a work trip. I'm sorry. It got out of hand. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. The kind of sentence that means nothing once the hurt has already happened. My father stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. I have never, in 35 years, seen him that angry. He didn't yell either, not really. He just looked at Derek, voice barely recognizable. "Get out of my house." Claire didn't scream at Derek, didn't throw anything, didn't demand an apology in front of everyone the way I half expected. She stood up, walked to the back room, told Mia and Jack it was time to go, and left without another word to any of us. I found out much later her silence wasn't shock. It was the beginning of something she'd already started building before that dinner even happened, though none of us knew it yet. I didn't know it yet, but Claire had noticed something was off with Derek nearly 4 months earlier. Unexplained charges on a shared credit card. Evenings he couldn't account for. She'd quietly started meeting with a divorce attorney of her own, on her own schedule, telling no one. She hadn't known who the other woman was. She just knew something in her marriage had gone wrong, and she'd decided she wasn't going to be the last person in the room to find out the truth. That night, after Claire and the kids left, and after my father told Derek and Megan both to leave his house, I sat at that dining table with my mother, while she cried in a way I'd never seen her cry before. Not loud, just steady. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere very old. My father sat across from us, silent, staring at nothing. "I don't understand how he could do that to his own brother." My mother's voice barely held together. I didn't have an answer for her. I still don't, honestly. Not one that makes any real sense. Some people just decide the people closest to them are the safest ones to hurt, because they assume the relationship itself will absorb the damage. Derek was wrong about that. So was Meg. I drove home that night to a house I no longer wanted to live in. Monday morning, before I'd even had coffee, I called a family law attorney, Marcus Delgado, whose office was a few blocks from my job downtown. I sat in his office 2 days later, laid out the whole situation. No kids, a modest shared house, 4 years of marriage. He told me plainly this was about as uncomplicated a divorce as his office ever handled from a legal standpoint. "The paperwork is simple," he said. "The rest of it usually isn't. Give yourself time for the rest of it." He was right. The paperwork took a matter of weeks. The rest of it took a lot longer than that. I didn't know it yet. But the next several weeks were going to bring far more consequences than I'd bargained for. Not for me, for Derek and Megan. Starting with a conversation my father had already begun having with his own estate attorney, before that Sunday dinner had even finished clearing off the table. Here's something I didn't know about my father until all of this happened. He is a far more careful man than either of his sons ever gave him credit for. My parents had spent the better part of a decade slowly moving pieces of the family hardware business, sold outright years earlier, proceeds reinvested into rental properties around the valley, into a family trust intended to pass to Derek and me equally when they were gone. Never a secret. We both knew it existed. What we didn't know, because my father had never needed to explain the fine print, was that the trust included a standard morality and conduct clause, the kind of language his own estate attorney had insisted on years earlier. The kind most families never think twice about. until a situation like this one forces the issue. Any beneficiary found to have caused, in the trustee's judgment, serious and deliberate harm to the family unit could be removed as a beneficiary by the surviving trustees. My father is the surviving trustee. My mother is the other. 3 weeks after that Sunday dinner, my father sat Derek down, alone, without me in the room, because he wanted to be fair about it and told him he was invoking that clause. Derek would receive nothing from the trust. Not because my father wanted to punish him financially forever, he told me later, but because he needed Derek to understand, in a way that would actually cost him something, that what he'd done wasn't a private mistake between 3 adults. It had detonated an entire family, including 2 children who would spend the rest of their lives dealing with the fallout of a decision they had no part in making. Derek fought it. Of course. Hired a lawyer. Tried to argue the clause was too vague to enforce. My father sat me down one evening, a few weeks in, over coffee at his kitchen table, and walked me through exactly why he'd never worried about that argument holding up. That clause was written 11 years ago, he said, turning his mug slowly in his hands. My attorney at the time said every family trust needs one, even if you never think you'll use it. Did you ever think it would actually apply to one of us? No, I didn't. But I also didn't write it to apply to any one person. I wrote it, we wrote it, to protect the family itself, whatever that ended up meaning down the road. I sat with that for a long moment. My father isn't a man who talks much about his feelings. He shows you what he means instead, and lets you catch up to it in your own time. You could have just given him a smaller share, I said, quietly. Nobody outside this house would have ever known. That's not the point. Ryan. He set his mug down. The point was never what the neighbors think, or what gets said at the next family function. The point is that some things, once you do them, change what you're actually entitled to. Not as a punishment, as a fact. Your brother changed what he was entitled to 2 years ago. I just wrote it down 11 years early, before I even knew whose name would end up in that sentence. I didn't have anything to say to that. I still don't, most days. Turns out it meant this. The case never even made it to a real hearing. Derek's own attorney told him privately the language was airtight, and pursuing it further would just cost him more money he no longer had. Because at the very same time, Claire's own attorney was moving forward with the divorce, and a request for the family home, and primary custody of Mia and Jack. That's the part of this story I find the most satisfying, honestly. While Derek was busy trying to fight my father over money he'd lost through his own choices, Claire's case moved forward almost quietly, almost gently. Because she'd done her homework months before any of us knew there was homework to do. I found out the full extent of it much later, from my mother, who'd stayed close with Claire even after the divorces made most family gatherings awkward, roughly 4 months before that Sunday dinner. Claire had noticed a pattern of unexplained charges on a credit card she and Derek shared. A hotel a few miles from their own house. Charges for dinners on evenings Derek told her he was working late. She hadn't known who the other woman was. She genuinely suspected, for a while, it might be someone from his job. But rather than confront him outright and risk him covering his tracks better, she'd quietly started building a file. Bank statements. A calendar cross-referenced against his claimed work schedule. A first meeting with a divorce attorney on her own lunch break. Telling no one. Not even her own sister. I wasn't going to be the last person in my own marriage to find out the truth, she told my mother. Months after everything had settled. I'd already decided that, whatever it turned out to be. I wasn't walking into it blind. By the time Sunday dinner happened, and the truth came out in front of the whole family, Claire already had a forensic accountant retained, already had documentation tracing exactly how much of their shared money had gone toward hotel rooms and gifts over 2 years. Money that legally belonged to their marriage and their children, not to whatever Derek had been quietly funding on the side. She didn't need dramatic confrontations or extra investigating once the truth was finally out in the open. She simply handed her attorney what she'd already built and let the process do the rest. By the time the dust settled that winter, Claire kept the house near Hawthorne Park, kept primary custody, Derek moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, seeing his kids every other weekend. He tried calling me a handful of times over those months. I answered exactly once, mostly out of habit more than any real desire to hear what he had to say. I know I destroyed things. I never meant for it to go this far. You had 5 years to not start something with my wife. You had 2 years to end it before I found out on my own. You didn't do either. So no, I don't think didn't mean for it to go this far means what you want it to mean. He was quiet for a long moment. Do you think Dad will ever let it go? The trust? All of it? Yeah, I think Dad built that trust to protect his family. You're the one who decided you weren't part of what needed protecting. That's not something I can undo for you. And honestly, I wouldn't if I could. You're my brother. His voice cracked slightly. Like that fact alone should have counted for something after everything. I was. You spent 2 years deciding that didn't matter to you. I'm just the one who's finally agreeing with you. I hung up. I haven't spoken to him since. Other than the bare minimum required at our mother's insistence around a couple of holidays neither of us particularly wanted to attend. My divorce from Megan finalized that following spring. A quiet morning at the county courthouse downtown. Not much to fight over. No kids. A modest house we sold and split according to what we'd put into it. By the time the paperwork was in front of us, neither of us had much fight left. We stood outside the courthouse afterward, both of us unsure what to say. I really am sorry. Ryan, I know that doesn't fix anything. No, it doesn't. But I believe you mean it, for whatever that's worth now. That was the last real conversation we had. She moved to Portland a few months later. According to my mother, who still occasionally hears from her out of some old sense of habit, I don't know what her life looks like now. I've made peace with not knowing. I want to tell you about the last part of this story, because I think it's the part that actually matters most. For the first couple of months after that Thursday, I didn't do much besides work and sit in Chris's spare bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Chris Bennett had been my closest friend since high school. He never once made me feel like a burden for crashing on his couch for 2 weeks while I figured out whether I could stand living in my own house again. He didn't offer advice most nights, he just made sure there was food in the fridge and didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. About 8 months after that Thursday afternoon, Chris talked me into a barbecue at his place. Mostly, I think, because he was tired of watching me turn down every invitation he sent my way. That's where I met Hannah Reyes. She worked as a physical therapist at a clinic downtown, laughed easily, had absolutely no connection to my family or the wreckage they'd left behind, which, at that point in my life, felt like its own kind of relief. We talked for most of that evening about nothing important. I remember driving home afterward feeling something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Mild, uncomplicated curiosity about another person. We didn't rush anything. I wasn't in any state to rush anything. I told her that honestly on our second date, laid out roughly what I'd been through, without turning it into a performance of my own pain. She appreciated the honesty, she told me later, more than she would have appreciated me pretending I had nothing to work through. Over the following months, dinners turned into weekend hikes out along the river trails, which turned into her meeting my parents, who liked her immediately. I think they needed a little bit of proof that something good could still grow out of everything that had happened. My mother told me once, near the end of that year, that watching Derek lose the trust hadn't given her any real satisfaction. What gave her comfort, she said, was watching me actually rebuild something honest, instead of just being angry forever. I think about that Thursday afternoon more than I'd like to admit. The grocery bag hitting the floor. The sound from upstairs. My brother's face. When he realized there was no explaining his way out of what I'd seen. I used to think the worst moment of my life was standing at the bottom of those stairs. Now I think it was actually the beginning of the only version of my life that turned out to be real. There's a version of this story where I never drive home that Thursday, where I trust the text message, stay at my desk, eat a sandwich at lunch, and go on for another year, another 5 years, inside a marriage that was already hollowed out without my knowing it. I think about that version sometimes, Not because I want it back, because I want to understand how close I came to living inside it forever. People ask me sometimes if I feel like I lost a brother that day. And the honest answer is more complicated than yes or no. I lost the brother I thought I had. The one who taught me to throw a spiral, who handed my girlfriend a lemonade and made a joke I laughed at without a second thought. That brother, it turns out, was already gone long before I caught him upstairs. I just hadn't been told yet. What I actually lost that Thursday was the last few months of not knowing. And honestly, some days I think that not knowing had already cost me more than the truth ever did. Mia and Jack are doing okay, from what I hear through my mother. Claire has built a steady, quiet life for the three of them. Derek sees his kids on schedule. According to my mother, he started actually showing up for it. Now that showing up is the only thing he has left. I don't know if that counts as growth, or just consequences finally landing where they should have landed years ago. Maybe it's both. As for me, I bought a smaller house on the other side of the West Hills last winter, closer to the park, far enough from the old house that I don't drive past it by accident anymore. Hannah and I are talking about moving in together this year. My father still runs that trust with the same quiet, careful precision he always had, even when none of us realized it. A few weeks ago, my mother and I were clearing dishes after Sunday dinner, just the two of us in the kitchen, while my father dozed in his chair in front of a game on television. She was quiet for a while, trying the same plate longer than it needed. "Do you ever wonder if we should have handled it differently?" she asked. Quieter. Maybe. Less public. I thought about that question honestly before I answered it. No. If we'd handled it quietly, Derek would still be telling himself it was a misunderstanding, and Claire might still be wondering why the credit card statements never quite added up. Sometimes the loud way is the only way that actually ends it, instead of just burying it. She nodded slowly, set the plate down, didn't ask again. Every Sunday now. Dinner happens at that same table near Hawthorne Park, minus one chair that used to be Derek's. And honestly, most days, none of us miss it being empty. Mia and Jack still come with Claire every few weeks, still get spoiled by their grandparents, same as always. And if anyone at that table still thinks about the empty chair, nobody's said so out loud in a long time. So let me ask you something before you go. If you were sitting at that table, would you have said it? Quiet? Kept it in the family? Let it die on its own? Or would you have done exactly what I did, put it right in the middle of the table where nobody could look away? Tell me in the comments. I actually read every single one. And if you want to see what happened when Claire finally sat down with Derek face to face for the first time since that dinner, that's next week's video. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss it. See you there.